And welcome to this ArtRatio webinar, and this time is called Green and Sustainable Art Collections. I'm your speaker. My name is Manoj Patak. I'm a chartered engineer and the founder and CEO of ArtRatio. So let's have a couple of definitions. First of all, by green, we mean respectful of the environment. And by sustainable, we mean that we're meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. And that definition, of course, comes from the United Nations. So when we put those two definitions together in the context of art, then we could define this as being an art collection whose needs respect the environment both today and in the future. That's what we mean by a green and sustainable art collection. So here's a quote from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe: "Colors are light's suffering and joy." Now, there are many ways of interpreting this, of course. The way that I personally interpret it is that light brings pleasure through the improved perception of fine details and colors on works of art. But light also brings pain due to the deterioration of the artworks on display. So where can we find art exhibited? Well, obviously we find it in museums and galleries and corporate offices and private residences, but we can also find a lot of art exhibited throughout the year at art fairs and auction houses and hotel lobbies, corporate events for the banking sector, as well as airports and even super yachts. So the kind of risks we're talking about here are, for example, abundant daylighting or sunlight, climate controls which are optimized for humans rather than art, as well as things like vibration, air pollution, accidents, theft, fire, and even static electricity. So if there's one organization which has dedicated its existence to the whole built environment and making it sustainable and green, of course, it's the World Green Building Council. Now, this is a non-profit formed in 1993, composed of about 70 or so national councils, along with thousands of corporations. And green buildings, of course, aim to reduce negative impacts on our natural environment through the efficient use of water, energy, light, waste, pollution, and air quality, etc. And in particular, the US Green Building Council has been responsible for creating a standard called Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or LEED, and this is sitting currently at version 4. Now, LEED version 4 awards 2 points for the adoption of at least 300 lux in 50% of regularly occupied floor areas. And of course, by doing this, we're trying to use more natural light and therefore reduce the amount of artificial lighting, which reduces, of course, the carbon footprint of the building. And of course, natural light or daylight is very good for humans. The trouble is, of course, if that building space also houses art collections, as in all the examples we saw before, everything from airports to super yachts, this would restrict the most sensitive objects in any art collection to very limited annual exhibition times. So other LEED 4 requirements related to light management include light pollution reduction. These are external issues, including things like night sky access and nighttime visibility, and interior issues to promote occupant productivity, comfort, and provide personalized lighting control. So Mandy Liu of Samuel Anderson Architects in New York has a very good quote, and they're winners of the LEED Gold Award for the Allen Memorial Art Museum. And they are saying that museums are inherently not energy efficient because strict humidity and temperature control must be maintained at all times. Another document which is very relevant is the British Standards Institute PAS 198 document, and they say that museums need to approach long-term collections care in a way that does not require excessive use of energy. Another quote from that same document mentions that it's time to shift museum policies and guidance given to architects to the conservation needs of different categories of objects, and they can have widely different requirements. So we can conclude from that blanket solutions are not the way forward. So have a look at this table. This is lifted out from CRE Technical Report 157, and it lists the different categories of objects. The most important, the most sensitive ones are CRE Category 4, which are classified as highly sensitive. And examples of this would be silk, and newspapers, and fugitive colorants such as indigo, lake, or gamboge. And the maximum recommended illuminance would be 50 lux. And the maximum exposure throughout 1 year would be 15,000 lux hours in a year. Now, 15,000 lux hours in a year could be achieved by having 15,000 lux for 1 hour, or by having 1 lux for 15,000 hours. Both of them would give you the same overall amount of energy, which is being impacted on the art collection. So, even if you take this top example of highly sensitive materials and you expose them to 50 lux of daylight over, let's say, 3,000 hours per year, which might be a typical exhibition times, then materials such as silk and paper would suffer noticeable deterioration between 1.5 and 10 years. And that's if you have daylight components with UV. Okay, so that assumes that you don't have any special UV filtering on your glass. Now, don't forget, normal float glass will let through, it will transmit UVA. It'll block UVB, but it will still transmit UVA, and that can still do a lot of damage to art objects and art collections. Okay, so if you look at a typical model for light exposure on art collections, you have a light source kicking down about 300 lux through some glass, which might have some variable transmittance, let's say 0 to 50%, and that's assuming, of course, that we're using with some kind of dynamic glass or switchable glass, as we do at ArtRatio, which means that coming through the glass would be from 0 to 150 lux, shining down onto your beautiful work of art, which might have a maximum exposure of 15,000 lux hours in a year, according to the example that we saw before. And if you multiply that by 365 hours in a year, so that's about a tenth of the time of the overall year that it's actually being put on display, with that, you'd still get a light exposure of 54,750 lux hours in a year. And of course, that is considerably more than the 15,000 lux hours, which is recommended by the CIE. Now, you can calculate all of that out with a spreadsheet. I've got such a spreadsheet already. If you'd like to have a copy of that, please contact me and I'll be delighted to work with you. So let's look at a couple of museums which are LEED compliant, and this is the very first one, Grand Rapids Art Museum, and they achieved LEED Gold back in 2008. They have heat recovery ventilators, CO2 sensors. Another one is the Broad Art Museum, which again achieved LEED Gold. This is based in Los Angeles. And they have electric car charging stations and bike parking spaces. And the Harvard Art Museums, again, LEED Gold, and they have thousands of sensors monitoring the indoor climate and shades covering the glass roof to allow in natural light. And then we have the Corning Museum of Glass. This is actually the Contemporary Art and Design Wing, which achieved LEED Silver, and they have about 900 skylights, and they use LED lighting to reduce energy consumption. So how many more of these sustainable art collections are there in the world, where there are probably a lot more than appear on this list? These ones tend to show LEED because they were gauged against the US compliance with the LEED standard, but there are quite a few more, as you can see, also in the UK. And here is an ArtRatio client, National Museum of Sweden, and their focus in redesigning this beautiful building was to let in the light, as they said in their initial brief, and we were very pleased to be able to deliver one table using smart glass to try and reduce light damage on some of the oldest objects in their collection, series of 15th century books of hours. You can find more on the ArtRatio blog, which talks about that particular project. Thank you very much for joining me on this webinar. A quick shout out to our institutional partners, which include the Museums Association, LAPADA, the Institute of Conservation, and CIHA. And I look forward to joining you or seeing you on another webinar from ArtRatio at some point in the future. Thank you very much.